Welcome to the course on OpenAPI specification and Swagger tools. So this course will make you master on OpenAPI specification and Swagger tools. So before I try to cover the agenda of this course, let me explain you quickly what is an OpenAPI specification. So OpenAPI specification is a standard that is majorly used by the industry to describe our APIs. Like if you are into a scenario where you are dealing with the APIs on day-to-day basis, then it is advisable you to master this OpenAPI specification so that you are following the standard in describing your APIs. So that brings to another question, like why should I describe my APIs with the help of OpenAPI specification? So if you are building a lot of APIs inside your organization, there is a good chance that these APIs may get consumed by other client applications or other organizations. So whenever you are into these kind of scenarios, definitely you will get hell lot of questions from your consumers asking about what is the format of your request for your APIs, what is the format of your response for your APIs, what are the security requirements, what are the validations that you have inside your APIs. So these are all the kind of questions that you may face from your consumers or from your QA team whenever you are building APIs, and you can't go and explain for all the people and for all the consumers about your APIs. So instead what you can do is you can describe your APIs by following the standard, which is OpenAPI specification. And once you master about OpenAPI specification, you can also take help from the Swagger tools available to make your lives easy whenever you are dealing with the APIs. So that's why it's very important you mastering OpenAPI specification and Swagger tools if you are dealing with a lot of APIs on day-to-day basis. So now let me walk you through the agenda of this course so that you are clear about what we are going to discuss inside this course. So we'll start this course first by entering into the world of OpenAPI, and in the process we are going to talk about what is an OpenAPI, what are the problems it is trying to solve, what are the advantages that we get whenever we follow OpenAPI specification. So once we are clear about OpenAPI introduction, we are also going to talk about history of OpenAPI and Swagger. So there is a lot of confusion inside the industry about the relationship between OpenAPI and Swagger. That's why we're also going to spend few minutes understanding the relationship between them. So once we are clear about the relationship between Swagger and OpenAPI, we will jump into the Swagger tools. We are going to spend good amount of time understanding various Swagger tools available, and Swagger tools has both open source tools and commercial tools. We are going to explore all of them so that you are clear and you can start using them inside your projects, and you can make your life very easy by using these Swagger tools. And once we are clear with the Swagger tools, we are going to discuss how to get started with OpenAPI specification in two kind of scenarios. The very first scenario is code first scenario. So inside code first scenario, we will think like you are into a situation where the backend code or the code related to your APIs is already available, but you just wanted to describe them with the help of OpenAPI specification. And the second scenario or the approach that you might be into is design first scenario. So in this scenario, we will think like you got a request from client saying that you have to develop so and so APIs, and you have to describe your APIs with the help of OpenAPI specification before you start the development. So we'll take both these two scenarios and we'll try to talk about how to approach with OpenAPI specification with these kind of scenarios. So once we are clear about this basic concept, we are going to jump into the advanced topics like how to write a valid OpenAPI YAML document. So in the process, I'm going to explain all the syntaxes, all the elements and fields, objects that are supported by the OpenAPI specification. And once you write a basic OpenAPI YAML document, we are going to talk about how to write reusable content inside your OpenAPI document with the help of components object. So once you are clear about this reusable content inside OpenAPI with the help of components, we are going to talk about what are the data types supported by the OpenAPI and what are the scenarios that we need to use them. And during the discussion, we are also use them inside our OpenAPI specification document, and we are going to do a lot of hands-on. And once we are clear about these data types, we are going to look into a super complex topic, which is inheritance and polymorphism inside OpenAPIs, like how to use these concepts inside your OpenAPI specification so that you are following good standards or best practice while you are defining OpenAPI specifications. And by the time we are done with these advanced concepts, we will become master of OpenAPI specification, but we will not stop there and we'll continue to discuss other interesting topics like how to describe your API security with the help of OpenAPI specification, followed by how to mock APIs with the help of OpenAPI specification. So we'll take a scenario where we want to mock the APIs with the help of OpenAPI specification. And whenever we are mocking the APIs, both the consumers and producers, they can start their development parallelly, and the consumers, they never have to wait for the producers to complete the backend API logic. Instead, they can rely on these mock APIs that we can generate with the help of OpenAPI specification. And after these mock APIs, we are also going to look at how to generate the client code and server stubs using your OpenAPI specification. So this is one of the great advantage whenever you define your APIs with the help of OpenAPI specification. You don't have to write the initial skeleton code or initial code for your APIs. Whether you are a consumer or a producer, you can generate the code within seconds. And as a developer, you just have to write the actual business logic and everything else will be taken care by the code that we generated with the help of Swagger tools. And after code generation, we are also going to explore how to deploy and host our OpenAPI specification documents so that all your consumers, they can always go to that website or URL and they can always find your latest and greatest OpenAPI document which they can refer on day-to-day basis. So these are all the high-level topics that we are going to discuss, and I also want to assure you that all these complex concepts are going to be explained in an easily understandable format. Like you can see, these are the sample topics and the slides that we are going to discuss inside this section. So using this approach, I'm sure you are going to love the content of the course and you can learn all these complex topics very easily. And apart from theory, I also want to assure you that we are going to consider a fiction web application based upon e-commerce, and we are going to build a lot of APIs, and during the same process I'm going to explain each and every concept inside OpenAPI specification. So this is how our OpenAPI specification is going to look like by end of this course. I also want to assure you that I'm going to share all the OpenAPI specification samples that we are going to discuss by using a GitHub repository. Along with this OpenAPI specification YAML documents, I'm going to share you all the content that we are going to discuss in a PDF document so that in future, whenever you want to quickly brush up all this concept, you can simply refer to this PDF document. And this PDF document also will save your time. Like you don't have to take notes while taking this course because all the notes is already readily available inside this PDF. So with this, I have explained about this course on a high level, like all the agenda that we are going to discuss and what we are going to learn inside this course. So please don't hesitate in enrolling into this course. I'm sure you're going to like it. Thank you, and I'm hoping to see you in the next lecture. Bye. Before we start the exciting journey of OpenAPI specification, I want to share few important details inside this lecture which can help you throughout this course. So the very first information that I want to share is about the GitHub repository. So like you can see, this is the GitHub repository of this course. The URL is github.com/easybyte/OpenAPI. So inside this GitHub repository, I have uploaded all the OpenAPI YAML example documents that we are going to discuss. Like if you can open this folder, you can see these are all the various OpenAPI specification YAML documents that we are going to discuss. And the reason why I have uploaded multiple YAML documents here is, so throughout this course, we are going to achieve multiple milestones. Like if you see the very first YAML document will only have the minimal document of OpenAPI specification. So similarly, as and when we are discussing about a concept and when we achieve a major milestone, I am going to upload that inside this GitHub repository so that you can always refer them in future whenever you have some questions around the OpenAPI specification. And very similarly, we also have other information inside this repository which I will be explaining you throughout this course. And you can also find the important links that we are going to refer throughout this course inside this GitHub repo. And after the GitHub repo, the next information that I want to share here is you can download the PDF content that we are going to discuss from this lecture. Like this is the lecture number 2 under the section 1. You can see there is a resources option here. So under the resources, you have an option of downloading the PDF, and you also have a link to our GitHub repo. So feel free to use these links to download the PDF document and navigate to the GitHub repo. The reason why I'm sharing now itself is so that you don't have to focus on saving all these YAML files and taking notes that we are going to discuss. All the content that we are going to discuss is present inside this GitHub repo and inside this PDF that I have uploaded. And the next information that I want to share here is, like whenever you're taking a course inside Udemy, you have the options of like changing the quality. Like if your bandwidth is super slow, then you might see some quality issues. Though I have uploaded a good quality videos, due to your network speed, you may see some low quality videos being played. So that's why please always click on the settings button and try to choose the best quality so that you can see the videos in a good quality. And similarly, you also have an option of to change the playback speed. Like if you feel like I'm talking too fast or too slow, you can change this playback and accordingly you can continue the course. And the last information that I want to share here is Udemy asks your review or feedback at early stage of the course. Like once you're done with 2 to 3 videos itself, it is going to ask you what is your initial review or rating. So if you feel you're not yet ready to provide a review to this course, I would recommend you to at least complete the 30% of the course videos. And by the time you will get some good understanding about this course, and post that you can provide your review to the course. And definitely reviews to the course is going to help me a lot, like to understand your feedback. And throughout the course, if you have any questions, you can also post inside the Q&A section of this course. So with this, these are all the important information that I want to share. I hope you are clear about all these details. So feel free to download the PDF content immediately and navigate to the GitHub repo and bookmark it so that you always have this information handy. Thank you. And from the next lecture, let's start the journey of OpenAPI specification. Bye. So now you have decided to learn about OpenAPI specification along with the Swagger tools. But before we jump into the discussion about OpenAPI specification, let's try to spend few minutes talking about what is an API. So if you see here, API means application programming interface. So that's a full description of API. And if you can ask me what is exactly the definition of API, I would say an API defines the allowed interaction between two pieces of software. And these two pieces of software can stay locally or remote. Like two different applications which are staying in two different locations, they can still interact with each other with the help of an API. And inside these API definitions, it will have list of possible methods or operations that someone can invoke in order to establish an interaction between two components or two pieces of a software. And apart from the list of possible methods or operations, the API also defines what is the input parameter, what is the request structure, what is the response structure. So all these details are clubbed together. We call them as an API. And like I said, APIs can be local, where two different parties which are staying inside the same mission, they can interact with each other with the help of local APIs. If you really ask me, please provide me some examples for local APIs. I would say your operating system and the applications are the softwares which are installed inside your laptop. So that's a good example. Like whenever you want to run an application inside your laptop, like maybe you want to open your browser or maybe you want to open a document. So all these commands, like based upon your actions on the UI, the operating system will give instructions to these applications which are staying in the same system with the help of API. So that's a classic example of local APIs. And just like how we have local APIs, remote APIs are also perfectly possible. Like in the scenarios of remote APIs, two different applications or two different softwares which are deployed in two different servers staying in different locations, they can still interact with each other over a network with the help of remote APIs. And the party which is offering its services through an API, we call them as provider, and the other name for provider is producer. So both producer and provider we can use. And whoever is consuming the services or who are requesting these services, we call them as consumers. So what will happen usually is, so both this provider and consumer, they will have a contract established between them, like this is how the request and response structure will be, and based upon that contract the API communication will happen, and they will make sure there is enough communication will be happening between them whenever the schema or the contract of the API is changing. Otherwise things will break and the communication between the two applications will be stopped. And the next question that you may have is how we are going to develop these APIs. So usually these APIs are built by adhering the standards of HTTP and REST. So there is a good chance wherever you work inside your organizations, you will find the APIs communication is happening with the help of HTTP and REST protocol, because this is a very predominantly used mechanism, since they provide a lot of advantages, like they are very lightweight in nature. We can build them, we can deploy them with a very minimum efforts. So due to all these advantages, you will see good amount of APIs are being developed with the help of HTTP and REST. So this is all the definition of API, and you may ask me a question here. Could you please provide me some real-time examples where these APIs are being used extensively? So for the same, like you can see here, I would say APIs are everywhere. Like wherever you go, that you can see the APIs. The very first real-time example that I can provide is, you take any e-commerce application. So what we usually do inside any e-commerce application like Amazon is, we'll do our shopping based upon our interest, and once we feel we have completed the shopping inside that application, we will do a checkout and we'll try to make a payment. And whenever you are onto the payment page, there are list of options that are provided by the e-commerce application, like you can pay the payment with the help of credit card, with the help of PayPal, with the help of your bank account. So in these kind of scenarios, a API communication will happen. Think of a scenario, you choose the PayPal as a payment option, and obviously Amazon and PayPal are two different applications and two different organizations. So what might have happened in the background is, they might have an API agreement or API contract established, and based upon that, whenever user click on this PayPal button, the payment will be processed, and here PayPal is acting as a provider and Amazon application or e-commerce application, they are acting as a consumer. So this is one of the classic example that I can provide. And one more example that I can provide here is, think of like you decided to go for a vacation along with your family or with your friends, and the very first thing that you try to do is, you will try to book the flight tickets, and instead of you going and searching what is the options that you have, what are the price of these flight tickets into all the websites, you might go into a traveling website where they will list down all the airlines details along with their options and price details. You as an end user, you just have to enter what is your source and destination, what is your travel date, how many persons. So once you enter all these details, so what this travel booking website will do is, behind the scenes, it will interact with all the external airline applications like Etihad Airlines, Singapore Airlines. Based upon that API communication, it will fetch the details and display the response onto the screen saying that so and so airlines has so and so flight with so and so price details. So all those details will be accumulated and displayed to the end user. So behind the scenes, you might not be observing, there are tens and tens of APIs communication might be happening with all the external applications. So here obviously the producers or providers are airline companies, and the consumer is the travel booking website, because it is trying to consume the APIs exposed by other organizations like airline companies. So these are the two examples that you can see on day-to-day basis. But apart from these two examples, APIs are everywhere. It's just that you can't feel them. Like whenever you are using your mobile web application, an API communication might be happening behind the scenes with the backend server. The same applies for the website. The same applies for the IoT devices. So these APIs are everywhere in the world, and that's why I would say these are the unsung heroes, because we can't see them. The communication is happening, but behind the scenes all this magic will happen, and they will make sure the communication is happening between multiple systems, and the end user will get the required information based upon the action that he's performing on the UI or mobile application. So this is all about the introduction about API. I hope you are very clear. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. Now in this lecture, let's try to understand why do we need OpenAPI specification? What are the problems that this OpenAPI specification is trying to solve whenever we are dealing with the APIs development? Like we were discussing in the previous lecture, APIs will help different organizations and different applications to interact with each other. But whenever these different applications or different organizations, they want to interact with each other, without the OpenAPI specification, they have to face certain problems or certain challenges, which obviously our entire industry faced before the invention of OpenAPI specification. The very first problem that we have without OpenAPI specification is you don't have any proper API documentation. Like whenever I want to consume certain APIs belongs to certain organization, in order to understand what is the request structure, what is the response structure, I need to heavily depend on the documentation prepared by that organization. And this will lead to improper API documentation or unclear API documentation, because whenever we try to explain the request or response structure through documentation, there will be a lot of interpretation mistakes will happen. Like someone can mention inside the document saying that for so and so field, I'm going to accept a string value or alphanumeric value. But the consumers can interpret that as there are no length restrictions. I can send any string of 1000 characters or 2000 characters. So in these kind of scenarios, until unless my producer mentioned clearly inside the documentation saying that for this particular field, I'm going to accept a string value of length 10 characters or 12 characters. So all these kind of details, they have to mention inside the documentation, and there is a lot of scope for mistakes because all these documentations has to be written by the developers or the business analyst, and this leads to lots of problems, and the developers are forced to read the source code, debug the programs, or analyze the network traffic to understand what's the real issue. And eventually they will identify this is a documentation issue, this is not mentioned properly in the documentation. That's why the communication is failing, some random remote scenarios are failing. So these are all the pain points due to the improper API documentation. And the second problem that industry and the API developers faced before the OpenAPI specification is there is a lot of collaboration is needed between the consumers and producers, developers. Like if someone want to consume a REST service exposed by a producer company, then definitely in order to finalize the request structure or response structure, they need to do a lot of collaboration in terms of organizing meetings, meeting with each other. And this will be a nightmare, especially for the organizations where they're trying to build public APIs or product APIs, because every time a consumer trying to onboard to consume their REST services, then definitely the producer has to repeat all these exercise of onboarding them, collaborating with them, explaining them, conducting KT sessions, organizing meetings. So this will be a hell of nightmare for product companies. Especially think of a scenario, Twitter has APIs, GitHub has APIs which are used by public, and if they don't have proper documentation or proper standards defined, it will be hell of nightmare for them explaining these things for each and every consumer who is trying to consume their REST APIs. And the next problem that industry face without OpenAPI specification is there is no standard. Like Twitter can follow their own standards, GitHub they can follow with their own standard, and similarly for Facebook, Microsoft, every organization they'll have their own standards. And since there are too many standards which are specific to each company, then definitely you can't expect the open source community or some developer to think of some automation or building some tools around it or fixing the bugs in that standard documentation. So these are all not possible without having a single standard for everyone in the industry. So these are all the problems that industry faced before the invention of the OpenAPI specification. So industry went through all these problems, and eventually the standard of OpenAPI specification came into picture, which will make the developer's life easy both on the consumer side and the producer side. I can provide you a quick glimpse of how the OpenAPI documentation will look like, how the consumers can understand what is the request structure, what is the response structure that they have to send by looking at the OpenAPI specification. So let's try to quickly check that. So here you can see I came to a website called editor.swagger.io. For now, please don't worry about all these details. What is Swagger editor, how to write OpenAPI specifications, how to visualize it in an UI web page. So all those details eventually we'll discuss inside this entire course. But for now, I just want you to get a feel of what we are going to develop inside this course, so that you know what is coming towards you. So you can see here on the left hand side, I have written a YAML document by following the OpenAPI standards. And like I said, we are going to discuss how to write these OpenAPI standards. And of course, I have written with the help of YAML, and you can also write with the help of JSON format also. We'll discuss all those details. So if you see here, the beauty of this OpenAPI standard, so whenever I define the details of my APIs with the help of OpenAPI standards, so there are good amount of tools like Swagger editor, Swagger UI, which will help us to visualize the documentation in an easily understandable format. So you can see here on the right hand side, we have an UI web page, which is an exact representation of whatever we have written on the left hand side using the OpenAPI standards. So the scenario that we are going to work inside this course is, I'm going to imagine a fiction e-commerce web application. So the e-commerce web application name is Easy Shop, and it has certain APIs which is exposed for the other organizations. Like any organization can consume these REST APIs exposed by my Easy Shop, and they can list my products inside their websites, and they can take the orders from their customers, and those order details they can forward them back to the Easy Shop with the help of API communication. And Easy Shop eventually will process all those order details, and it will ship them to the customer address. And the Easy Shop is also going to give some affiliate bonus or commission bonus to the other website whoever helped Easy Shop in gaining these orders from the public. So that's a brief introduction about Easy Shop. So here you can see I have various sections, and according to the sections we have the REST APIs. Like for categories, we have an REST API with the name /categories, which is of HTTP GET, and similarly I can also get category details based upon the category ID. So if you click on this tab that we have, so you can see here the OpenAPI specification clearly mentions what is the request structure and what is the response structure. Like you can see here, for these categories REST API operation, it supports HTTP GET method, and it is also accepting a query parameter which is of optional. And we can also mention what are the examples that they can send as part of query parameter. Like you can see here, the query parameter for mobiles is 101, and similarly for laptops the query param will change, which is like 102. So like this we can provide the request structure along with the valid examples. And similarly, if you go and check the response, if someone is just simply invoking this categories operation without passing this query parameter, they will get all the list of categories that are supported by this Easy Shop in the response. Like you can see here inside the response, we are sending the list of categories supported by the Easy Shop, like mobiles, laptops, cameras, headphones, televisions. So these are all the categories or the departments which are supported by the Easy Shop. Under each category, we can have various products, and that's where we have product section also. So inside products also, they can try to invoke this get products API. Like if you go and observe the get products API here, and here also we have an category ID query parameter, which is an optional. If someone is not passing this category ID, then they are going to get all the products available inside my Easy Shop from all the categories like mobiles, laptops, televisions. So this is how it is going to look like my schema. So this is an example response. If someone can click on the schema definition, they can easily understand how my response structure is going to look like. So here you can see the product is an list of products, like array of products, and each product will have details like product ID, which is of integer, and name, price, category name, quantity. So this is a sample response that they can expect whenever they invoke this API. And very similarly, I have an order section, like where using these APIs, my other web applications or applications, they can invoke these APIs. They can place an order with the help of post operation. So these are all the APIs that we are going to build, and in the process I'm going to explain you all the minute details inside the OpenAPI specification. What are the Swagger tools that are going to help us in the journey of OpenAPI specification. So I hope this is all clear to you, like what is coming towards you and what are the problems that industry used to face before the OpenAPI specification. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. Now in this lecture, let's try to talk about what is the definition of OpenAPI specification. If someone asks you what is really an OpenAPI specification, you should be in a position to give an answer. So let's try to discuss about the same. So like you can see here, OpenAPI specification in a short form, we can also call it as OAS. So OpenAPI specification. So that's a full description of OAS. So whenever someone says OAS, or whenever I use this inside this course as a OAS, it means OpenAPI specification. So please make a note of that. Now, if you ask me what exactly is an OpenAPI specification, the definition is very simple. OpenAPI helps us in defining or specifying our HTTP based, especially REST APIs. Like with the help of OpenAPI definitions or specifications, which I can write in the form of YAML or JSON file, I can describe my APIs. When I say describing APIs, I can describe how my input structure is going to be, how my response structure of my API is going to look like, what are the mandatory fields, what are the length restrictions, what are the valid value restrictions. So all those details I can define with the help of OAS or OpenAPI specification. So that's the simple or smallest definition that you can provide. So if someone asks you, simply say that OpenAPI specification describes our HTTP REST APIs, especially how the request or response structure will look like for a specific API. And apart from describing the request and response structure of an API using OpenAPI specification, we can also include information like where these APIs are hosted, what are the host name details, what are the server details, using which my consumers, they can invoke the REST APIs that I have exposed as an producer. So it's obvious, right? The very first question someone will ask you if you give your APIs to them for consumption is, what are the endpoint URLs? What are the server details? So that kind of information also we can include inside the OpenAPI specification. And apart from the server details, we can also define what are the security requirements, what are the authorization, what are the authentication mechanisms that we are using for the APIs communication. We can't just build the APIs which can be invoked or consumed by anyone. So inside real world applications or inside real world APIs, the security is a major requirement, and with the help of OpenAPI specification, we can define the security or authorization details as well, using which my consumers can get a good idea how to consume my APIs. And like I was telling before, OpenAPI specification is being maintained by an open source community under the Linux Foundation umbrella. So since there is an open source community, anyone can contribute, and since this is not being controlled by any particular organization or any particular community, anyone can contribute towards it, anyone can provide feedback. Like in future, if there is an improvement that we can bring inside this open API, we as a developers or as a community, we can always propose that to this open source community. And if it makes sense and if it is going to help majority of the developers, then definitely this open source community will adopt this feedback. So that's one more major advantage that we have with the OpenAPI specification. And the last point that I want to highlight here is, since this OpenAPI specification is being controlled by open source community, and since there is a lot of openness, and this encourages a vast amount of developers to create tools around it, because if there is a standards which is not going to change from organization to organization, and if there is a thumb rule that everyone is going to use the same standard, then definitely some developer or some community or some organization, they can think of tools that can automate the process around APIs communication or APIs development. So that's a beauty or the advantage that OpenAPI specification also has. It has a lot of tools that supports OpenAPI specification standards, using which the developer's life will be very, very easy. And we are going to discuss such kind of tools in this course as well. So this is all high level details about OpenAPI specification. This is just a definition. I know you might have a lot of questions like how to define OpenAPI specifications for a particular API that I have. So don't worry, please be patient. We are going to discuss all those details one by one. So now you are clear about what is an definition of OpenAPI specification. Let's try to discuss advantage of using OpenAPI specification in the next lecture. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. So now is the time to quickly discuss about the advantage of using OpenAPI specification. Obviously, there has to be a good amount of advantages using this OpenAPI standards. Otherwise, why industry will adopt this over the years? So let's try to quickly jump into this and try to discuss what are the advantages of using OpenAPI standards whenever you are building or consuming REST APIs. So the very first advantage that we have is OpenAPI specification can be understood by both machines and humans. So how this is possible? Because they follow a certain structure or a skeleton or schema, and this is not going to change. So due to this template structure or standard structure, the machines can understand the specifications that we write as long as we teach them how to read those OpenAPI specification. So when I say machines, there are good amount of tools that analyze your OpenAPI specification based upon the standards, and these tools, once they understand the OpenAPI specification, they will perform the desired output for which they have been invented or for which they have been developed by the open source community. And apart from the machines, even humans or the developers, they can easily read the OpenAPI specification with the help of Swagger UI tool. Like I was showing before, you don't have to understand all the YAML or the JSON structure. You can straight away give that as an input to the Swagger UI tool, and it is going to convert that into a beautiful HTML representation where you can easily understand what are the APIs, what are the HTTP methods that it supports, what is the request structure, what is the response structure. So all those details can be easily identified by the developers as well. So that's the first and major advantage that we have whenever we follow the OpenAPI specification standards. And the next advantage that we have here is using OpenAPI specification, there are good amount of tools that generate both server side code or client code of various languages, which will free the developers from writing the initial skeleton code. So this automatic generated code is smart enough to perform data validations as well. So if you as a developer trying to produce an API with the help of OpenAPI specification, you can generate the server code or the backend code And using that skeleton structure, you can only write the business logic inside it, and you can forget about all the standards that you need to follow for that particular language. Like if you are developing using Java or Python or Node.js, you are free from writing all this initial code, and there are enough tools that will help you to generate the server-side code based upon the OpenAPI specification. And just like how we have server-side code, these tools are smart enough to generate the client code as well based upon the language that you choose. And using this client code, you can easily consume the APIs that are exposed by the other organizations. And if you are working in a product company like Twitter or GitHub, or any payment processing systems like PayPal, you may have to write an SDK. So SDK means software development kit, which you can give to any developer who are trying to consume your REST service. So using this SDK, they will just invoke your REST APIs just like how they are invoking the methods or functions inside their programming language. So that's the purpose of SDK. So if you go to any famous product organizations, they try to provide SDK for various languages like Python, Java, JavaScript. So those kind of SDKs also can be generated easily with the help of tools if you have written the OpenAPI specification. And the next advantage that we have here is, if you have OpenAPI specification, you can use the mock servers to mock the response, which enables both consumers and producers to start their development at the same time. Like the consumers, they don't have to wait for the producers to complete the API development. They can simply feed this OpenAPI specification to certain mock servers, and using those mock server responses, my consumers, they can start the development without the need of waiting for my producer to complete their development. So we are going to discuss this inside this course, like how to mock the response with the help of OpenAPI specification, which will help the consumers to a great extent. After the mock servers, we can perform the validations on the data flowing through your APIs. Like you can define the validation requirements inside your OpenAPI specification, saying that I need this field to be integer and this field to be an string of so and so length of so and so valid values. If you define those requirements inside the OpenAPI specification, the code that you generated with the help of tools, they will have this kind of validation code inbuilt so that the developers are free from doing those validations using the if and else conditions. And the last advantage that we have here is, OpenAPI is a widely accepted standard. A large developer community is using it because it is being maintained by the open source community, and due to all this large developer community usage, there are a good amount of automation tools came into picture, and everyone are using them, and they are making their lives easy during the API's development. So these are all the high level advantages of using OpenAPI, but there are many advantages whenever you adopt OpenAPI standards inside your projects. I hope you will also realize all of them while we are discussing the concepts of OpenAPI specification inside this course. So with this, I'm assuming you are super clear about what are the advantages of OpenAPI specification on a high level. But don't worry, we are going to see all of these advantages in action, and that will bring a wow on your face, and I'm sure and I'm very confident about that. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. Now in this lecture, I want to provide details about what is Swagger and what is an OpenAPI specification, what is the relationship between them, what is the history about them. So there is a lot of confusion in the developer community about the relationship between the Swagger and the OpenAPI. So let's try to quickly discuss about the same so that you are super clear about the same. So around 2010, a small set of people or a small set of community, they see the problems that industry is facing without having any standards around the API's definition. So that's where the small community, they started building specifications for designing RESTful APIs along with the set of tools like Swagger Editor, Swagger CodeGen, Swagger UI, which will help developers and organizations in implementing and visualizing the APIs defined in the specification. So this is the story around 2010 where a small set of people, a small set of community, they started this activity as an open source activity. So that's why in 2010, everyone used to call the OpenAPI specification with the name Swagger. So even today, there are many people refer the specification standards as Swagger, which is not correct. And somewhere in 2015, the Swagger was adopted by the Smart Bear company. So this Smart Bear company, what they have done is they have donated the specification part, like whatever is built by the Swagger people from 2010 to 2015 to the open source community under the Linux Foundation. And that specification part, they rename it to the OpenAPI specification instead of Swagger specification, because the Smart Bear company, they want to retain the copyrights of the term Swagger. So from 2015, the Smart Bear company, they acquired the Swagger and all the tools that are developed as part of Swagger, like Swagger Editor, Swagger UI, Swagger CodeGen. So all these are still the responsibility of the Smart Bear, and these tools are still the open source tools provided by the Smart Bear, but the specification part or the standards definition part, this has been donated to the open source community under the name OpenAPI specification. So from 2015, under the Linux Foundation, a set of open source developers and community, they are evolving the OpenAPI specification day by day. And based upon the specification or standards update, the Smart Bear company, they are trying to update these Swagger tools so that both the standards and Swagger tools are in sync. So this all happened in 2015, but if you ask me what's the status today, the status is almost the same, but the Smart Bear company, apart from the open source tools that they have like Swagger CodeGen, Swagger UI, Swagger Editor, they also build some commercial products. Using these commercial products, big enterprise organizations, they can make their life super easy whenever they are trying to adopt the OpenAPI specification. So that's the advantage that Smart Bear company got due to this acquisition of the Swagger. So I hope you are getting like what happened from 2010 to today. So the simple answer is initially the name was Swagger. Later on, all the tools are adopted by the Smart Bear company, but they have given the specifications or standards part to the Linux Foundation with the name OpenAPI specification. So that's why from now onwards, whenever you're trying to refer to the specifications or the standards, you need to refer it as OpenAPI specification. But if you are referring to the set of tools or any tool which is developed by the Swagger or Smart Bear company, you should use the Swagger. But still today, you can see people using the Swagger and OpenAPI specification interchangeably. And in fact, I do that a lot, and you might observe in the course as well. That's all due to my old school habits. So please excuse me. But like I said, the correct way of referring this is the standards or specification part, we should call them as OpenAPI specification, or anything around the tools which are developed by the Smart Bear, we should use the Swagger keyword. So I hope you are clear about the history of the Swagger and OpenAPI, what is the relationship between them. So with this, thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. Like we were discussing in the previous lecture, with the Swagger keyword, there are a set of tools available that are being maintained by the Smart Bear company. So let's try to discuss what are these tools that are available, and obviously we are going to use these tools a lot inside this course, but inside this lecture I just wanted to give a quick introduction about them. Like you can expect, the purpose of any tool is to make our lives easy. Very similarly, under Swagger we have a set of open source and commercial tools built around the OpenAPI specification standards that can help developers in designing, building, documenting, and consuming the REST APIs. So if you really look at the set of tools available under the Swagger name, they are divided broadly into two categories. One is open source tools which anyone can use, and very similarly we have commercial tools where someone has to pay certain amount of money in order to use them. So under open source tools, we have Swagger Editor, which is a kind of browser-based tool where you can write the OpenAPI specification. And the advantage of the Swagger Editor is it will give you an inline feedback whenever you are making a mistake while writing your OpenAPI specification. And very similarly, we have a Swagger UI. So the purpose of the Swagger UI tool is whenever you are writing your OpenAPI specification in an YAML format or JSON format, it will render that specification into an easily understandable HTML web page. So using this HTML page that got generated with the help of OpenAPI specification, any developer or any business analyst, they can easily understand what are the set of APIs available, what are their request, response. So this is a major advantage of Swagger UI. And at last, we also have Swagger Code Gen. Like the name itself is saying that the purpose of this tool is to generate the code, and using this tool, we can generate the server-side code and client-side code like SDKs as well based upon the OpenAPI specification. And all these tools are available as a browser version also. If you want, you can also deploy them inside your own projects and you can host them inside your own web applications. But if you want to get started very quickly, they are also available as a browser versions. We'll be discussing all of them inside this course. And now coming to the commercial tools. So there are tools with the name Swagger Hub and Swagger Hub Enterprise. So using these tools, big enterprise organizations, they can build an environment like a GitHub repository or Docker Hub repository, just like how we have GitHub repository, which will help us in collaborating and maintaining the versioning of the code that we write. And very similarly, we have Docker Hub, which maintains all our Docker images, details, where we can store all of them inside this Docker Hub. Very similarly, we have a Swagger Hub, which will help us in designing and documenting all our REST APIs in a collaborative platform. And we can also store all these OpenAPI specification standards inside this Swagger Hub. And one more advantage with the Swagger Hub Enterprise is you can define some set of standards that your developers or business analysts or testers, they have to follow whenever they are trying to build or test your APIs. So that's the purpose of Swagger Hub. We'll be seeing them. The main advantage here is your developers, testers, business analysts, they can do a collaborative kind of work with this Swagger Hub. They can check in, they can change the versions, they can submit for reviews. So all that kind of thing possible with the Swagger Hub. And the last but not the least one that we have here is Swagger Inspector. So the purpose of this Swagger Inspector is sometimes as a provider or a producer, you might have already code written for your REST APIs. So in these kind of scenarios where you have already code is written, instead of you writing the OpenAPI specification manually with your own hands, what you can do is using Swagger Inspector, you can test all your REST APIs. And during this testing process, the Swagger Inspector will analyze all your request and response format. And based upon that analysis, it will give you the OpenAPI specification for your REST APIs within seconds. And the same documentation after your reviewing and updating, you can share to your consumers or anyone who is interested in understanding your APIs. So that's the beauty of Swagger Inspector. But like I said, these commercial tools, you have to pay some money in order to use them. So that's why only big enterprise organizations, they will use them a lot because they can afford them. But if you as a developer want to try, you can always go and register for a trial version where you will get few weeks of time. You can try them, and if you like them, you can propose inside your organization. So this is a brief history of these tools that are available under Swagger, which are being maintained by the Smart Bear. You can also verify in their website. Like, let me show you that quickly. So like you can see here, the website name is swagger.io. So this is the home page of the Swagger. You can also see there is a small tagline under the Swagger logo, which is supported by Smart Bear. So Smart Bear is a company which is building a lot of tools. Like if you are familiar with the SOAP web services, we use a tool called SOAP UI Pro. So the same tool is developed by the Smart Bear itself. So they develop a lot of tools which make our lives a lot of easy. So under the Swagger, they are building certain set of tools. Like if you can see here under Pro, we have commercial tools like Swagger Hub Enterprise, Swagger Inspector, whereas under open source, which they acquired in 2015 from the Swagger core team, you can see under this open source we have Swagger CodeGen, Swagger Editor, Swagger UI. So don't worry, we are going to explore all of them in this course. I hope this is all clear to you. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. As of now, inside this course, we have discussed about what is an API, why we should adopt OpenAPI specification during the API development, what are the advantages that it provides, and how OpenAPI specification is different from the Swagger, and what are the Swagger tools that are available. So all these kind of introduction we have discussed in the previous section, and now is the time to get started with the OpenAPI specifications. So whenever you want to describe your APIs, you might be into two different scenarios. The very first scenario is your organization might already have the code related to your API. That means maybe someone might have developed all your code without worrying about the OpenAPI standards and without writing OpenAPI specifications for your APIs. So that's very possible, because there might be some scenario inside your project where someone might have developed the APIs maybe a decade before, but now your organization want to build some OpenAPI specifications for your APIs. So this is very perfectly possible. And this is one of the scenario you might be into. And this scenario, we call it as code first approach, because the coding is completed first before writing the OpenAPI specification. And the other approach obviously is design first approach, which means you want to design your APIs first with the help of OpenAPI specification. And once this design is completed, then only you want to go to the coding section or development section. So these are the two flavors that you can encounter. The very first one is code first scenario, and the second one is design first scenario. So now in this section, let's try to understand how to prepare OpenAPI specifications for the APIs where the development and coding is completed. So in order to get started here in this kind of scenarios, we can leverage two tools provided by the Swagger, and these tools are Swagger Hub and Swagger Inspector. So let's try to understand what are these tools and how these tools are going to help us in writing the OpenAPI specification in the code first scenario. I hope this is all clear to you, like what we are going to achieve inside this section. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. Like we were discussing in the previous lecture, let's get started with OpenAPI specification by taking code first approach as a current scenario. For the same, we just have to explore the tools of Swagger, which are Swagger Hub and Swagger Inspector. So let's jump into the Swagger website quickly. So like you can see here, this is the Swagger website, which is swagger.io. So under this tools tab, you can see there are certain list of open source tools and commercial tools. So the tool that we are interested right now is Swagger Inspector. So let me click on that. So once I clicked on that Swagger Inspector option, I will be redirected to this web page. So here we can click on this option of try Swagger Inspector. So as soon as I click on that option, I will be redirected to this web page where using this page, I can test my APIs by passing the URL details, by passing the HTTP method details, request information. So before we try to jump in and test this web page or this Swagger Inspector tool, let's try to make sure that we are a registered user of this website. Because without registering yourself into the Swagger website, you can't generate the OpenAPI specifications. So that's why please make sure that you are clicking on this sign up button. Whenever you are using very first time, you can click on this sign up button and you can enter your details. And we also have a login option with the GitHub. So I'm just using the login option with the GitHub. So let me click on that. So as soon as I click on the login option with the GitHub, I am logged in into this website, and you can see this is my username, which is EasyBytes. And now I am a logged in user. So now what we can do is, using the Swagger inspector, we can test our APIs which are already developed and deployed into a server. So those details you can give here, like what is your URL, what is the HTTP method, like for get, it will accept the parameters, and for post, it will accept the body. So based upon how you are changing these HTTP methods, the web page will react. Accordingly, you have to provide your request information inside this web page. So now here, definitely we want to get started with this testing of this Swagger inspector, but we have a problem here. In real world, obviously you'll have some endpoint URL, you'll have some APIs to test here in this page. As of now, we didn't develop any APIs inside this course. Then how to get started in this kind of scenarios? So obviously developing the APIs and discussing about OpenAPI specification is a kind of not a good option, because we will waste a lot of time building the APIs, and that is not the scope of this course as well. So for the same, what we can do is we can use some of the APIs that are hosted on the online or on the websites. So for the same, let me show you two good websites where you can use them to test their APIs, and you can send some request and you can get some mock response. So these APIs will work exactly like your real world APIs. So let me show you those two websites. The two websites that we can explore here is, the very first one is Swappy, which is a short form of this website. So Swappy means the Star Wars API. Someone who is huge fan of Star Wars, they build an API. Using these APIs, we can get the list of people in the Star Wars movies, or the list of planets or list of starships that are used inside the Star Wars movies. I'm not sure if you follow the Star Wars and if you are a fan of Star Wars, but at least I'm not a big fan of Star Wars. I have never seen these movies, but that's fine. We can still use these APIs. So you can see here, if you want to get the details of people, you can use this API, like where if you use this entire URL, like this is the base URL. So here what we have to do is we have to take this base path, which is swappy.dev/API. So let me take this base path and I will copy paste the same inside my Swagger inspector. So here inside the Swagger inspector URL, I'm going to paste it. And after that, I'm going to give a path saying that people/1. I'm trying to send a request to this API, which is accepting HTTP GET method by clicking on this send button, and you can see I'm going to get a response from the API saying that these are the person details that you have requested, and these are the vehicles, starships that he or she uses. And as soon as you send the request and you get the response, you will also see after some time under history, this is the URL that you tested. So similarly, you can test any number of APIs. So let's try to test the other APIs that we have under swappy.dev. So here you can see the other APIs that we can test is planets, starships. So for the planets, the valid request is planets/3. So let's try to test the same. So I came to the Swagger inspector. So here the API path that I can give here is planets/3. So I'm just trying to send a request and I got the planet details in the response. And let's try to do the same for starships as well. So I'm taking the starship URL. So the URL is starship/9. So this also supports HTTP GET. So let me send this request. As soon as I click send, I'll get the response from this API. So don't worry, it will take some time to get displayed under this history. Like you can see, as of now, I got the second one. So after some time, after a few seconds, you will get the third request also that you have sent. But please make sure you are registered as a valid user inside this Swagger website. And by default, they'll give 15 days as a trial version. So inside this trial version, you can test all the Swagger inspector, a Swagger hub that we are going to discuss inside this course. So as of now, you can see I got the 3 APIs and all of them I have tested are HTTP GET. So let's try to test some HTTP post as well. For the same, I'm going to take you to another website, which is recres.in. So REQ indicates request, RES indicates response. So this is another good website where you can test some of the APIs that they have. whenever you want to test your code by invoking some REST APIs, you can always use them. So here you can see there are some get methods, post methods, put method, delete method. So let's try to test the post method. So in order to test this post method, I'm clicking on this post option that we have. So what we have to do is we have to take this base URL, which is recres.in, and to the same base URL, we need to append this path, which is /API/users. So after appending this, I'm going to copy this entire URL and I will mention the same inside the Swagger inspector. So let me mention here, but this time instead of HTTP GET, we need to make sure we are using the HTTP post. And since we are making a HTTP post, we need to make sure we are passing the request inside the body of the HTTP request. So we have a sample body here. So let me take this one. So I'm taking this sample request that we have and I'm mentioning the same inside our Swagger inspector. So with this, I think we should be good. Let me click on this send button. So you can see I'm getting a response saying that so-and-so person is created at so-and-so time. So now let's try to test one more API, which is of type delete. So for the delete, we can click on this delete option that we have. And this is the request that we can use. So let me copy this value. And I'm going to mention the same after the base path, which is recres.in. So after that, I'm mentioning API/user/to. And the HTTP method, obviously here we have to select is delete. And for this, we don't need to send any request. We can simply delete this one. So here you can see I'm invoking an API which is of type HTTP delete, and this is the URL. So what this is going to do is this is going to delete an user with the value 2. So let me click on this send button and you can see I'm getting a response saying that 204, which means there is no content, which indicates that this person or this user is deleted successfully. So now we have successfully tested various APIs like get, post, delete. So think of this as a real-time scenario. You will also have good amount of APIs. What you have to do is you just have to take the help of Swagger inspector. Using Swagger inspector, you need to test your APIs. It can be in lower environment or it can be in staging environment, but don't test the production environment because that will expose your data to the Swagger inspector. So let's not do that. So once you test all your APIs using the lower environment URL, you will get all those APIs under the history. So you can see as of now under the history we have 4 requests, but we have tested in total 6 requests. So I'll wait for a few more seconds for the other requests also to be populated inside this history because that is very important to generate the OpenAPI specifications. So I hope you are clear what we have done so far. I'm going to keep all these important websites that we are going to discuss, like these are the 2 important websites that we discuss. So I'm going to mention all these details inside the GitHub repository. So feel free to refer to the same. So with this, we tested successfully. In the next lecture, let's use the Swagger inspector to generate the OpenAPI specifications for our APIs. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. So now in this lecture, let's try to generate the OpenAPI specification by using the Swagger inspector. Like we are discussing in the previous lecture, we have tested good amount of APIs with the help of Swagger inspector, and they are showing under my history. I think in total, we have tested 5 APIs. Previously, I was telling 6. I was wrong. So 3 get APIs we tested, 1 post API and 1 delete API. But unfortunately, though I have waited for enough time, the delete API is not getting listed under the history. Seems there is a bug inside the Swagger inspector. The reason can be here, this delete operation is not giving a binary response, which I think these people didn't handle. So what we can do is we can quickly test an update operation with the help of HTTP put. So for the same, let me go to the website request response.in. So here I'm going to click on this put option that I have. So this is the path that I have to take. Let me take this path and I'm going to paste the same inside my Swagger inspector. I think the path is same. So let me paste one more time. So this is the complete path, and the HTTP method that we have to use here is put. But since for put, we have to pass the request inside the body. Let's try to take the request from the website. So this is the request that we can take. So let me copy and paste the value here. So I'm just sending this request and I'll get a response saying that so and so person is updated at so and so date and time. So now I'm going to wait few seconds, and I'm hoping this put operation will show inside my history. So let's wait for a few seconds here. So after few seconds, I got the fifth API also listed under the history. So now our job is super easy. If you want to generate OpenAPI specification for a list of APIs, what we have to do is we just have to select them. Like here, I'm trying to select all these APIs which are present inside my history, and if needed, you can pin them also for later use. For now, I'm selecting all of the APIs that we have tested, which are listed under history section here. So once we selected all these APIs, we can use this create API definition option, and here you can see as of now I want to go with the latest version of the OpenAPI specification, which is 3.0. So once we select that, you can click on this create API definition. And here you can see I'm getting a message saying that your API definition is generated successfully. But in order to see that OpenAPI definition, you need to go to the Swagger Hub. So that's where it is asking my permission. Can I redirect you to the Swagger Hub so that you can see your OpenAPI definition that is generated based upon your testing inside the Swagger inspector? So let me choose this option, which is go to Swagger Hub. So as soon as I click on that, you can see I will be redirected to the another tool of Swagger, which is Swagger Hub. So as soon as we land here onto the Swagger Hub, it is going to ask you few details like how you want to save this OpenAPI definition, what is the name, what is the version that you want to give. So here what we can do is we can give a name saying that initial underscore testing, and the version I want to keep it as 0.1 only, and the owner I will make myself as a owner, and the visibility I want to make it as private. So you have this kind of options inside the Swagger Hub. If you want to publish this to everyone, to the public, you can do that as well. Just like how we publish our repository inside the GitHub, the same is supported by the Swagger Hub as well. But please note that the Swagger Hub and Swagger Inspector, they are not of free. You will only get initial 15 days trial, and during that time you can explore them, and once you like, you can convince your organization to use these tools. So here, once we select this visibility option as private, I'm just clicking this option which is import OpenAPI. So here I'm getting a warning saying that private APIs are only for the paid users. So that's fine, we can change this visibility to the public. So let me click on this import OpenAPI. So as soon as we import that, you can see this is all the OpenAPI specification that is generated for our APIs which we tested with the help of Swagger Inspector. So these are all the APIs that we have tested, and you can see here, so this is the OpenAPI definition of your APIs, and on the right hand side you can also see this is the UI representation. Like these are the servers that I have used to test my APIs, and so you can see these are all APIs that I have used, like 3 GET requests and 1 POST request and 1 PUT request. So if you click on any of these links, you will be seeing what is the sample request structure. Like if you click on the schema, you can see someone has to pass what is the name of the person, what is the job of the person. So once these details are passed to this request body, then definitely it is going to create an user. So very similarly, if you go to the put operation also, the same is available under the schema, like what is the name and what is the job. And now if you go and check other GET requests that we have here, you can see if you are invoking this API path, you are going to get a response with this example value, and this is how the schema is going to look like. So how all this magic is happening is with the help of Swagger Inspector. So what it is doing behind the scenes is it is analyzing all your APIs while you are testing, and based upon the request and response that you are sending, it is preparing a OpenAPI definition, and this is the initial version which you can take as a base and you can update based upon your requirements. You can refine it further because this is not 100% correct. So if you see here, you will never going to have a API with the name /API/starship/9. We are never going to hard code the values like 9, 3, 2, 1 inside our APIs. It's just a placeholder, and these values can keep changing based upon the request that is coming towards your backend server. But these kind of intelligent things Swagger Inspector is not able to do as of now. Like if you try to send one more request for the same API Starship with a different value like 8 or 7, then definitely it is going to list it as a separate operation. So that's where you have to do your due diligence and you have to correct your OpenAPI definition, which is generated by the Swagger inspector. But I think this is a good start where 80% of the job is already done by the Swagger inspector. You just have to do some final touches before you publish that OpenAPI specification to your consumers. And of course, you may have a question here like, how can I update my OpenAPI specification? Because I don't know the structure. So that's where, don't worry, we're going to discuss how to write OpenAPI specification with your own hands. And that knowledge definitely will help you in updating or in optimizing your OpenAPI definitions that are generated with the help of Swagger Inspector. So I hope you are getting a sense of like what is the role of Swagger Inspector, what is the role of Swagger Hub. So inside Swagger Hub, you can see as of now, I saved this initial testing OpenAPI definition and I can publish this, and similarly I can create a new team, new organization, new project, and I can do a kind of collaborative style of working. Like I can create an organization, and the organization I can create multiple projects. Under the projects I can add multiple users, and all these users, they can do a collaboration while building these OpenAPI specifications, especially the developers both on the consumer side and the provider side. But please make a note that these tools like Swagger Hub, Swagger Code Inspector, there are commercial tools. So I have a slide also here detailing what are the details of Swagger Hub and Swagger Inspector. So these are all the details that we discussed already. I just have a separate slide for your reference so that in future, if you're trying to brush up your knowledge, you have a slide discussing about Swagger Hub, Swagger Inspector. So with this, I'm assuming you are super clear about how to get started in generating an OpenAPI specification in the code first approach. So in this approach, you already have your APIs deployed and developed. You are into a situation where you have to provide OpenAPI specifications. So in these kind of scenarios, you can test all your required APIs with the help of Swagger Inspector. And once the testing is completed, you can generate the OpenAPI specification, which can be used as a base version. And on top of that, you can do some optimizations based upon your due diligence, and the same can be published to your consumers. So I hope everything is clear to you. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. In the previous section, we have discussed how to generate an OpenAPI specification if you already have a code developed and deployed for your APIs. So now in this section, let's try to discuss the approach that we need to follow with the design first scenario. So there is a good chance that most of the times our clients may give their requirements for some APIs. Like they may say, this is my business scenario, I want to build so and so APIs, and the same I want to expose to so and so consumers. So this kind of high level business requirements my clients will provide. So based upon those business requirements, definitely the team members like project manager, business analysts, developers, testers, everyone will sit together and they will try to visualize how my APIs will look like once I complete the development. And during the same process, during the same discussions, there has to be some developer or business analyst or some person who take care of writing the OpenAPI specifications as well. So during those discussions, definitely, if we can write the OpenAPI specifications for the APIs that we are going to build, these OpenAPI specifications will help a lot, especially to get started with the coding at a faster pace. Because like I was telling before, if you write OpenAPI specification based upon your API requirements, the same API specifications you can use to generate the server code, client code, and the same specification you can give to your consumers so that they can start their development without waiting for you to complete the producer logic or producer APIs. So this kind of advantage we have with design first approach, especially the developers are free from writing lot of skeleton code, validations code. And if you are a product company where you want to expose your APIs for all kind of languages like JavaScript, Java, Python, .NET, So then writing OpenAPI specification is a strong recommendation because you can't write the initial server code or client consuming code in all these languages, and achieving this will be a huge task for your organization. So that's why please concentrate on writing the OpenAPI specifications with your own hands, and once you feel this OpenAPI specification is covering all your scenarios, all your request format, response format, the same can be used by both the providers, developers and the consumer developers. So once we decide to write the OpenAPI specifications in the design first approach, then that means we have to write OpenAPI specification with our own hands, letter by letter. So then this can be some cumbersome process because I don't know the structure of the OpenAPI specification that I need to follow. I don't know whether I'm doing mistakes while writing this OpenAPI specification. So to overcome all these kind of problems, we can use a Swagger editor tool. So this is again a tool developed by the Swagger team, which you can use inside the browser itself. So once you started writing the OpenAPI specification based upon the structure that we are going to discuss in the coming lectures, the Swagger editor is going to provide you an inline feedback. Like whenever you are doing a mistake, it will immediately give a feedback saying that so and so mistake is there inside your OpenAPI specification. So again, whenever you want to write OpenAPI specification, we can write in two formats. One is in the YAML format or other one is in the JSON format. And inside this course, we are going to use the YAML format because that is the most commonly used approach, and YAML is more easy compared to JSON. So with this, we can get started writing OpenAPI specification with the YAML format. But before that, in the next lecture, let's try to spend few minutes understanding what is an YAML, how it is different from JSON. So we can have a quick tutorial kind of thing so that you are comfortable with the coming lectures. And I'll also make sure I'm providing enough details about the YAML syntaxes throughout the course so that by the end of this course, you are comfortable with the YAML as well. So let's try to jump into YAML in the next lecture. Thank you. Bye. Now in this lecture, let's try to talk about YAML quickly so that you are comfortable with the YAML syntaxes that we are going to use while writing the OpenAPI specifications inside this course. So before we try to write a simple YAML file by following the YAML syntaxes, let me spend few minutes explaining you the history of YAML, why YAML came into picture, why it is better than JSON and XML. Like you can see on the screen, we have a quick comparison between three formats that industry uses heavily. The very first one is XML, the second one is JSON, and the third one is YAML. So back in the days around 2000, industry heavily uses XML for data communication and server configurations or any configurations that they want to do inside the web applications. But XML has a serious performance issues. The reason is, like you can see, I'm trying to represent the same data in three different formats. The data that I'm trying to represent here is, I want to list down the list of applications that an organization has and what is that technology that they use inside each application. So like you can see, if I try to represent the same information saying that so and so organization has three applications with the name accounts, cards and loans, and the technology that they use is Python, Java and Ruby. So inside the applications, like you can see, for every information that we want to transfer or that we want to represent with XML, it should have an opening tag and a closing tag. Like the very first tag that you can see here is the applications. So that's why the same has to be closed towards the end of the file, and the same has to be done for application, name, technology. So if you can observe here, rather than the actual data, there is a lot of metadata present inside the XML, which makes your XML heavy in nature. And this is a simple XML structure. But in real applications, you may have a data which is having thousands and thousands of lines of XML, and that will make your data heavy during the data transfer over the network. So that's why when the REST APIs came into picture and mobile applications came into picture where everyone want to communicate with the REST APIs, instead of going with an XML structure, they choose the JSON structure, which is an JavaScript object notation. So compared to XML, JSON is very lightweight in nature. The reason is, if you can look at the same data which I have represented in JSON format, inside JSON, you don't need to maintain that metadata information like opening tag and closing tag. You just mention only once like application, name, technology. So that brings a lot of advantage to the JSON because it doesn't have to maintain a lot of metadata, and it is super lightweight in nature since we are avoiding a lot of metadata with the help of JSON. And inside JSON, we can also represent our data as array, and we can also represent complex objects with the help of JSON very easily. But JSON will simply expect you to maintain those double quotes, colons, commas. So all this kind of syntactical structure you need to make sure you are following. And since this JSON is generated by the libraries, no one raised any concern, and slowly they started using JSON also inside server configurations, code configurations as well. But while people are using JSON lot, then DevOps came into picture, cloud came into picture, where we as a developer or DevOps team members, we have to write a lot of configurations with the help of JSON. But we as a human beings, we are tend to make these mistakes because even if I miss a colon or a comma or a double quote, it is going to make my JSON as an invalid. So that's where the industry started moving into a new data representation or config representation, which is YAML. So YAML is super easy for humans to write and understand, because it only follows the structure like spacing structure or indentation. It doesn't expect you to maintain all those double quotes, commas, closing bracket, open bracket, square brackets. So all this hell of syntaxes you don't have to follow. You just follow a spacing structure or indentation structure, then your YAML file or YAML configuration will work perfectly. So the full description of YAML is YAML ain't markup language. So like you can see here, the same applications data I can easily represent with YAML without any double colons, square brackets, curly braces. Inside YAML, whenever you want to have an array of elements or array of objects, you just have to use the hyphen. So just like how I'm using here, whereas in JSON, you need to keep everything inside the square brackets. So we'll try to understand how to write a simple YAML file so that you are comfortable with the basic structure or basic syntaxes of YAML. And during the entire course, whenever I'm trying to use a new syntax of YAML, I will make sure I'm explaining and giving enough background of it for you so that you are comfortable using the same inside your OpenAPI specification. But if you are interested and if you are using YAML extensively inside your projects on day-to-day basis, I would recommend you taking an YAML course. I also have a separate YAML course inside Udemy where I have discussed everything about YAML, including the advanced concept. So please enroll the same if you are interested. So with this, I have given a brief history and introduction to YAML in the next lecture. So let's try to write a simple YAML data. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. Now in this lecture, let's try to write our first YAML file. For the same, I came to a website called json2yaml.com. So you can always use this website whenever you want to write a YAML file, and this website will also convert that YAML file into a JSON file, and it will also give you an inline feedback if you are making any mistakes. So this is a very good website if you want to practice YAML and if you want to envision your YAML in an JSON format while you are writing. Like you can see here, on the left hand side, we can write the JSON format, which will get converted into an YAML file on the right hand side. Or we can also do the vice versa, like we can write the YAML format on the right hand side and the same will get converted to JSON on the left hand side. since we want to get started with the YAML, let's go to the right hand side of the website and try to write the YAML data. So inside YAML, everything has to be represented in a key and value format. Like every value will have a key. Like if I want to define my name, I can define saying that name is the key and the value is easy bytes. So you can see on the left hand side, we also have the JSON representation of the same data. And you might have seen these curly braces is an extra data inside the JSON, which we don't have to maintain inside the YAML. And the same applies for the double quotes. So inside YAML, whenever you're writing string, you don't have to mention the double quotes, and your YAML is smart enough to interpret the data. And even if you want to pass the double quotes also, it's perfectly fine. It will take that double quotes and it won't complain for any compilation issues. So that's the advantage here. So let me remove these double quotes. And using YAML, you can write complex objects very easily by following the spacing structure. Like suppose if I want to define a person details, I can have the key as person, and inside this person, I want to mention all his details. Like as of now, you can see in the JSON, it is representing as null because I have not written anything. So what I can do right now is I want to define what is the person name first. So whenever I want to write some data belongs to certain parent key, I need to make sure I'm giving a tab here. So the tab space is very important, just like in Python language, how you maintain the spacing inside your blocks of code. The very similar rule we have to follow here. So since I want to define the name of a person, I can say name is a key again. And what is the name of the person? I will say John Doe is the name of the person. And I can also give the age of the person. So since the age also belongs to the same person object, I need to make sure I'm following the same spacing indentation just like name. So the age I can mention something like 30. And like I was telling before, using YAML, we can write any complex objects data. Like think of a scenario for this person, I want to represent his address details. So address also can be another object. So what I can do is I can create a key with the name address. And instead of defining a single value data, I can again start one more inner object for this address. So for the same, I need to press enter and press and tab again, so that the details that I'm typing right now will go under the address object but not into the person object. So here what I can do is address line 1 is a key that I can mention. So you can see here address line 1 is a key, and the value that I can mention is street number 1. And next I can also mention the city as one more key, and the value is New York. And country I can mention, under country I can mention USA. So you can see how the data also being represented inside the JSON. So writing all this JSON data manually with our own hands is a very painful process because it expects a lot of syntax like closing braces, opening braces, double quotes, comma, which is very error prone in nature. Whereas with YAML, you just follow the structure and the spacing indentation, and with that you should be good. And writing arrays of information or a list of information also is very easy inside YAML. Like think like for Easy Bytes, I want to mention what are the courses offered by Easy Bytes inside Udemy. So what I can do is I can press enter and I can come to the initial line, which means the place where my name and person is present. So at the same position, I can start a new key with the name courses. And inside these courses, I want to mention the list of courses offered by the Easy Bytes. So like I was telling before, whenever you want to mention the list of data inside YAML, you need to start the data with the hyphen. So the very first course name that I want to mention is YAML. And the second data that I want to mention is OpenAPI specification. But again, like I was telling, we need to make sure we are starting with hyphen. So here I will mention OpenAPI. And the third data I will mention as Spring, and fourth data I'll mention as microservices. So like this, we can mention any number of data just like inside an array with by following this hyphen syntax. So you can see inside the JSON, the same courses array is represented with this square bracket, whereas with YAML, it's very simple. You just have to follow these hyphens. So here you may ask me a question like, what will happen if I give some extra space? Like, let me give a tab for this entire courses structure. So now you can see the data went under person object. So now these courses are belongs to this John Doe person. So that's why you can see within this opening brace and closing brace of person, you have all this data like name, age, address, courses, etc. So let me revert this space change. So now you can see the same is displayed under the root structure of my JSON data. So one more thing you need to make sure is whenever you are maintaining key and value in the same line, like you can see here, I'm giving the key and this is the value inside the same line, we need to make sure we are giving this extra space. Otherwise my YAML can't recognize what is the key name, whether the key name includes everything like name, colon, easy bytes or only name. So that's why as per the YAML syntax, you need to make sure once you give key name and if you are giving a value in the same line, we should have this space. Otherwise your entire YAML file will become invalid. So you might have observed here, writing anything with the help of YAML is super easy compared to the JSON. So that's why most of the developers or most of the business analysts, team members, they use YAML whenever they want to define any DevOps configurations. It can be in the AWS, GCP, Azure or GitHub, any configurations that they want to write, they prefer YAML because this is very less error prone and this requires very less space and less time to validate. So due to that reason, even for OpenAPI specification also, majority of the people, they use YAML. So the same we are going to use inside this course. And of course, we can always write OpenAPI specification with the JSON also, but that is super complex process. So my recommendation is to go with the YAML. And whatever you write inside YAML can eventually be converted into JSON as well if required, because YAML is a superset of JSON. Like whatever you have in the JSON, the same is present inside the YAML as well. If some extra feature which is present inside YAML and which is not present inside JSON you are using inside your YAML file, the same will be simply ignored during the conversion process. So I can quickly give you an example here. Like YAML supports the writing comments inside your YAML file, whereas JSON does not support writing comments inside your JSON file. So writing the comments inside YAML file, we can easily do that with the help of hash. So once you mention hash, you can write the comment saying that sample YAML file. So if you see here, the same comment is not converted into a JSON structure because JSON doesn't support that comment feature. So that's why please don't worry, whatever you can represent with the help of JSON, the same can be represented with the YAML. And this is because YAML is a superset of JSON. Whatever is available inside JSON, the same, everything is available inside YAML. On top of that, there are some extra and advanced features available inside the YAML syntax. And like I was telling before, if you are interested in learning YAML advanced concept, please enroll to my YAML course. It's just a 2 hours course and within 2 hours, you can become a master of YAML syntax. So with this, I'm assuming you are super clear about how to write the configurations or data with the help of YAML syntax. But don't worry, whenever I'm using any new syntax or new terminology of YAML, I'll make sure I'm explaining the same throughout this course. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. Now in this lecture, let's try to write the minimal OpenAPI specification document so that we can get started with the journey of OpenAPI specification. I know you are super excited about starting with the OpenAPI specification structure, how to write it using YAML format. So in this lecture, we are going to focus on writing the minimal structure or the minimal elements that we need to write inside a OpenAPI specification in order to make it as a valid OpenAPI specification document. But of course, OpenAPI specification or OAS structure is a very long and complex one, and that's why we are going to divide it into multiple lectures and we'll focus element by element And during the same journey, we're going to discuss what is the purpose of particular configuration or particular element, so that we are taking baby steps towards the goal of learning OpenAPI specification. So if you ask me like what are the basic elements that I need to write inside my OpenAPI specification to make it a valid, these are the minimal elements that you need to write. Like you can see on the left hand side, I have put a small image where I have mentioned the minimum set of elements that we need to write. Like one is the OpenAPI, and inside that you need to mention the OpenAPI version as a value. And post that OpenAPI root element, you will have an info object. Inside the info object, title and version are the mandatory fields. So that's why, though there are many other elements that you can write inside info, but on a high level, if you want to get started with the minimum structure, at least you have to define the title and version inside the info object. And at last, the other mandatory element, just like OpenAPI and info, is paths element. So under the paths, we can define the array of paths, like what are the paths that are supported by your APIs. But for a minimal structure, you can keep these paths as an empty array, which indicates as of now you don't have any API paths supported by your backend code. So that's a minimal structure. On the right hand side, I have also given a brief introduction. What is the purpose of each of these elements? Like OpenAPI is the very first root element that you need to mention, and this is a mandatory element. You can't skip that. So if you want to write anytime a OpenAPI specification document, this is the first element that you need to write. And against this OpenAPI key, you need to mention what is a value. So inside this value, you need to mention the version of the OpenAPI that you are using. So as of now, like 3.1.0 is one of the version of the OpenAPI. So you can define that. And the next mandatory root element is info. So info is an object. So using this info object, we can define the information like introduction about your APIs. What is the purpose of your APIs? What is the business that you do? What are the functionalities that are supported by your APIs? So all those kind of information we can write with the help of info object. And inside that info object, two sub elements are mandatory. The very first one is title. Title is something like quick summary that you want to provide for your APIs. Like if someone want to understand what is the purpose of your APIs, you can mention that description inside the title. And the next is version. So under the version, you can mention the version of your APIs. This version is different from the OpenAPI version that you have mentioned in the very first element. Like you might get started for your APIs with the version 0.0.1. Like whenever you release major releases or minor releases, you can keep increasing this version number accordingly. So this version indicates the versioning mechanism that you want to maintain for your APIs or for your application code. And at last, the last mandatory root element is paths. Like I was telling before, using these paths, we can mention the list of or array of path objects, like what is a path supported by your APIs, whether it is an HTTP GET, POST, and what is a request structure, what is a response structure. We can define all those detail under this paths root element as an array of path objects. But in order to get started with a minimal OpenAPI document, you don't need to mention any path related information. You can simply make this path as an empty array. So I hope you are clear about the minimal OpenAPI document that we can get started. So in order to write the OpenAPI specification, of course, I can write in a Notepad or Notepad++ or any text editor. But the disadvantage that we have with this text editor is they don't give you an inline feedback. Like if you are missing any syntax of OpenAPI specification and YAML, you will not get any inline feedback or warning, which is again not a good approach to get started with the OpenAPI specification. So that's why we have a Swagger tool with the name Swagger Editor, which is developed by the Swagger team itself. So using the Swagger Editor tool, we can write the OpenAPI specifications very easily, and at the same time we can get the immediate feedback as and when we are writing and updating our OpenAPI specification. So let's try to write this minimal OpenAPI document quickly inside that Swagger editor. So in order to write our first OpenAPI specification document, we need Swagger editor. For the same, I came to the swagger.io website. So here under these tools, under open sources, there is a tool with the name Swagger editor. So please click on that. So here you have multiple options for all the Swagger tools. You can download those tools and you can set up in your own environment, or you can deploy and try them in the cloud, or you can also use a browser version of it. Since we are learning the OpenAPI specification, the browser version is good enough, but if you are working on a very big enterprise organization where they don't want to use a browser version because that will expose your sensitive data or API's information data. So in those kind of scenarios, you can simply set up this tool inside your own network where there are enough firewalls using which you can control that your information is not going outside your company firewall network. So here for now, we can get started with this live demo option. So as soon as I click on this live demo, you can see I am navigated to a new website called editor.swagger.io. So here you can see as of now, there is already an OpenAPI specification example provided by the Swagger team. So this is an example OpenAPI specification of an fiction application with the name Swagger Pet Store. So like you can see on the left hand side, this is all the OpenAPI specification. So don't get worried by looking at this complexity of this structure. It's very super easy. We are going to learn everything by end of this course. And on the right hand side, you can see the representation of the same in an UI format, which means your Swagger editor tool has both editor and UI tool as well. So there is a Swagger UI tool which is embedded inside the Swagger editor tool, and the same you can see on the right hand side of the web page. So now here you can see I already have an OpenAPI specification for the example application which is Pet Store. Obviously we don't want to follow that. We will build something on our own. During the same journey we will learn everything about OpenAPI specification. So before I try to delete all this content that we have, let me explain you one very important thing about the very first root element. So here you can see this example is built based upon the Swagger 2.0 version. So that's why the root element is Swagger. But like I said previously, in 2015, Swagger is acquired by the Smart Bear company, and they have donated the specifications to the open source community, and they have renamed that specification from Swagger to OpenAPI specification. So that's why there is a 3.0 version came into picture, and from 3.0 we need to call that as OpenAPI specification. So from 3.0 you should not use the Swagger, instead you should use the OpenAPI. So that's a major difference that I want to highlight here. Now let me clean all this. So the very first element that we need to write here is OpenAPI, and what is the version of your OpenAPI. So I can write the current version of OpenAPI which is 3.1.0, but unfortunately as of now these tools which are developed by Swagger team and Smart Bear team, they have not upgraded their tools to support this latest version. So instead what we can do is we can use the version which is 3.0.3. So there is not much difference between 3.1.0 and 3.0.3, but by the time you are looking at this course, my recommendation is you try with the 3.1.0. So if the Swagger tools are supporting 3.1.0, I would say go ahead with 3.1.0. Otherwise, you can simply move to the 3.0.3 version so that there won't be any issues using these Swagger tools. And of course, whenever an OpenAPI specification new release is introduced, Swagger team, they will take some time to upgrade all their tools because they have to do a lot of testing, R&D. So once they feel very comfortable, then only they will release to the market. So the same happened with 3.1.0. So as of now, they are not supported. Let's use the 3.0.3. So here, as of now, you can see, so as soon as I provided this information, it is complaining two important mandatory fields are missing. The very first one is info and the second one is paths. So let's quickly provide the info object. Again, you can see here we are following the YAML structure. So very first line, you can see this is the key and this is the value. And inside the info, since it is an object, I need to give an enter and provided a tab. After this, under info, we have two mandatory fields which we need to provide. The very first one is title Under title, we can mention a value saying that Easy Shop Products API definition. So this is the title that I want to provide because we are going to build an OpenAPI specification for a fiction application with the name Easy Shop. So that's why I have given this title. The next mandatory element is version. You can also see here version is missing. So that's why we need to make sure we are also giving the version. So the version is the key and the value that I want to give is 0.0.1. And post that it is complaining that paths is the missing element at the root structure. So I need to navigate back to the root element structure. So here I need to give the paths as a key. And since it is an array, for now I just wanted to keep it as empty. So inside YAML, an empty array can be represented with the help of empty curly braces. So I'll just mention a opening brace and a closing brace. So with this, you can see all my compilation issues are resolved on the UI side also. And it is a basic OpenAPI specification that I have written with the help of this OpenAPI info and paths. And you can also see my Swagger UI is telling there are no operations defined in the specification. It's just a empty specification without any API paths information. So I hope you are clear like how to write a minimal OpenAPI specification document. I will upload all these OpenAPI specification documents that we are going to write in the GitHub location. Please refer the GitHub location whenever you have some doubt, whenever you have some issues. So instead of uploading a single large file, what I will do is I will upload this OpenAPI specification document at regular milestones. So this is the very first milestone that we have achieved. So I will upload this into the GitHub as well. So with this, I'm super happy because we had the taste of success very first time inside this course. Bingo and kudos to all your efforts. Thank you and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. In the previous lecture, we have written the minimal OpenAPI specification document, like you can see here, using 3 root elements which are OpenAPI, info and paths. We are able to successfully write a valid OpenAPI specification document. But this is just a tip of the iceberg. There is more to OpenAPI specification. In order to successfully define OpenAPI specifications for your APIs, definitely we should learn all the objects and elements that are supported by the OpenAPI specification. So let's try to take baby steps here. We will learn each object by object, element by element that are supported by the OpenAPI specification. So inside this lecture, we can explore what are all the other elements or variables and objects that are supported by the info object. So in the previous lecture, we have written only the mandatory elements present inside the info. Like whenever we are writing info object details inside an OpenAPI specification, title and version are the mandatory fields that we need to define. But apart from these 2 fields, there are good amount of optional fields also that we can define to make our OpenAPI specification easily understandable by other consumers. So for the same, let me take you the slide of info object. Like you can see here, an info object provides the metadata about your API. So this metadata information that you have mentioned inside your info object can be leveraged by the consumers to understand more details about your APIs that you are going to expose. So on the right hand side, I have mentioned all the fields that we can write inside the info object. The info object itself is a mandatory root element. That's why you can see the asterisk mark against to it. And inside the info object, we can write the title. So title is a mandatory field. Under the title, we can just mention what is the title of your OpenAPI specification. So this is very similar to our web pages. Every web page will have a title which can be displayed on the browser tab. So very similarly, we can define a title for our OpenAPI specification. And this is a mandatory field. So that's why I have put an asterisk mark against to it. And the same we have defined when we are writing the minimal OpenAPI specification document in the previous lecture. After title, you can define the summary and description. Like using summary, you can write a short summary about your APIs. And at the same time, using description, you can write a very detailed description about your APIs. And these 2 fields are optional fields. So that's why the asterisk mark is missing for these 2 fields. After the summary and description, we can use the terms of services. So using these variable or field inside the info object, we can provide an URL where my clients, whoever is consuming my APIs, they can read these terms and agreements using that URL so that they are very clear about what are the terms and rules that they need to follow whenever they are consuming my APIs. And the value that we are going to mention against the terms of service, it has to be an URL value. And after terms of service, we can write contact object. So the reason why I'm calling contact as an object is under contact, we can define multiple other information as well. I'll be explaining in few seconds what we can write under contact object. And after the contact object, we can define the license object also. Again, license also is an object because under license object, we can define multiple details related to license information. And at last, we have a mandatory field which is version, and using version we can indicate what is a current version of APIs that this OpenAPI specification representing. Like I can write multiple OpenAPI specification documents like for the first version, second version, third version. So using this version, I can represent which version of my APIs this OpenAPI specification document is representing. So that's why this version field is a mandatory field, because if you have multiple versions of API supported by your organization, mentioning that details in this field is very important, and without that there is a good chance your consumers may get confused and they may end up consuming the wrong version of APIs. So on the left hand side, you can see I have put a sample screenshot of how we can write the info object details inside an OpenAPI specification. I have mentioned the title, summary, description, terms of service, contact, license, and version details. So now let's try to understand what details we can write under contact and license objects. So the purpose of contact and license objects are self-explanatory. Like using contact object, you can mention the contact details, like if some consumer has some issues consuming your APIs, or if they want to reach out to you for any clarifications, you can define those contact details using the contact object. And inside the contact, you can mention the name of the contact using the name field and the URL where they can submit a ticket or they can reach out to our supporting team. So those kind of website details you can give under the URL field of contact object. And at last, we can also mention an email details using which they can send their queries to that specific email, and the same can be addressed by your supporting team or development team. And after the contact object, under license object, we can define the licensing information. Like whenever someone is trying to use our products or whenever someone is trying to consume our APIs, definitely you need to be very clear about your licensing information, whether they can use for free or it's only for commercial usage. So all those kind of licensing information you can mention with the help of license object. Under license object, you can see there is a mandatory field which is a name. So if you don't mention the license object inside your OpenAPI specification, then you don't have to worry about the name field, though it is mandatory. But what you have to infer from this is whenever you are planning to write license object details inside your OpenAPI specification, then at that point the name field is mandatory. So using the name field, we can define a name for your license details. And after that, we can also mention an identifier and a URL. So using the identifier, we can mention our license identifier, and using the URL, we can give an URL where all our license details are available so that whoever is trying to consume my APIs, they can go and understanding all the licensing requirements. So with this, I hope you are very clear about the info object. Like under info object, we can define various details along with the contact and licensing details. In the next lecture, let's try to put all this knowledge by defining all these fields and objects inside the OpenAPI specification document. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. Now in this lecture, let's try to update our OpenAPI specification document with all the new elements and objects that we have discussed in the previous lecture. So before I start updating this OpenAPI specification, I just wanted to share a note about this Swagger editor browser version. So this website version of Swagger editor, it will retain your lastly typed OpenAPI specification document. Like even if you visit this web page after 1 month, the same OpenAPI specification that we have left previously will be shown here. Like here I can refresh my web page any number of times, like whatever the previous version that I have typed inside this Swagger editor tool, the same will be retained. So this they might be doing using your browser cache, or they might be saving this information somewhere inside your laptop. So as long as you're not cleaning your cache and temporary files, you should not worry about losing the OpenAPI specification document that you have written inside this Swagger editor tool. But for some reason, if you want to save this OpenAPI specification like at regular intervals of time, you can always choose this file option that we have here. You can save it as an YAML, or you can also convert this YAML representation as a JSON and download. So using these options, you can always download them and keep it inside your local laptop. So now let's try to start writing the various elements that we have learned under the info object in the previous lecture. The very first element that I want to try here is summary. Like as soon as you type the summary, you can see on the right hand side, you are getting an error saying that it is not able to recognize this summary and it is treating it as an additional property. The reason why this is happening is whatever I have discussed in the previous lecture, that is from the version 3.1.0, but unfortunately since the Swagger editor is not yet supporting the 3.1.0, we can't use that element inside the info object. As of now, you can see we are using only 3.0.3, which is the latest version supported by Swagger editor when I'm recording this video. But when you are seeing this video, if the Swagger editor is supporting 3.1.0, you should be able to mention these summary details inside your OpenAPI specification. So for now, that's why I'm removing this summary element. Instead of summary, we can mention the description here. Like using description, we can mention the full details about your OpenAPI specification. So you can see here it is showing an error saying that you have just defined the variable name or element name, but you're not mentioned any valid string value. So here, let me type the description of my OpenAPI specification. I'll just type saying that using this OpenAPI specification, any consumer can understand the API that are exposed by Easy Shop. So like you can see here, as and when I'm changing this value on the left hand side, the same is getting reflected on the UI representation as well on the right hand side. So this is the beauty of the tools that are developed by the Swagger people like Swagger editor and Swagger UI. So now we have successfully mentioned the description details. So here we can also use one of the YAML syntax feature. So whenever you want to write a very lengthy description or very lengthy value inside your YAML documents, what you can do is you can simply type it like as and when you are typing inside your Word document. But the only thing that you need to take care here is you just have to mention a pipe symbol here. Like whenever you use the pipe symbol, your YAML will understand whatever lines of values that you have mentioned under this variable description. So all this value will be assigned to this description key name. So feel free to use this pipe syntax whenever you want to write a very lengthy description. So now after description, we can mention the terms of service. So I'm just mentioning the same. Like you can see here, the terms of service expect a valid URL value. And also please make a note that all these key elements should follow the same case sensitivity. Like instead of small t, if I keep it as capital T, you will see that is an invalid OpenAPI specification, because inside YAML, case sensitivity is very strict. So whenever you use capital letter instead of small letter, you will get compilation error like you are getting now. So let me revert this to small letter of T. So with this, we have successfully defined our terms of service. Like whenever someone want to read our terms of service, they can easily click on this link that is available inside the UI, and they can read all the terms of service that we have defined inside this website. Now after terms of service, we can define the contact details. But please make a note that contact is an object. So that's why what we need to do is we just have to give the key name, which is contact : and just enter and give a tab. So after you give the tab, you can define all your elements inside your contact object. So the elements that I can define here is name, URL and email. So this is the name that I want to give, and this is the URL where anyone can navigate whenever they want to submit a ticket or they want to reach out to us. And very similarly, we can also mention the email value. So I hope you are also getting the hierarchy, like all the root elements, they will not have any space inside your YAML document. But as and when you are trying to define inner objects, you just have to make sure you are following the tab space. Like here inside info object, I have a contact object, and inside contact I want to define multiple other details. That's why I have given this extra tab space under this contact. If I don't give this extra tab space and if I mention directly under the contact, then it's not a valid OpenAPI specification, because you have mentioned all these name, URL and email under the info, which is a not a valid syntax. So that's why please make sure you are following this tab space and the indentation very strictly inside the OpenAPI specification whenever you are using the YAML format. So after the contact details, we can also mention the license details. So under license details, we can mention the fields that are supported by the license object. So the fields that I want to introduce here is name and URL. So this is the name of my license, and this is the URL where someone can navigate and they can read all the licensing details. And you can also see on the right hand side how my OpenAPI specification is going to look like whenever my consumer is using Swagger UI tool. So here you can see it is just showing as a link. As soon as they click on that, they will be redirected to my web page, whatever I have mentioned inside the URL. So that's why please choose your name very wisely. Like if you see here, I'm just to mention EasyShop 2.0. It is not giving any clue that this is a link related to license. So what I can do here is, instead of EasyShop 2.0, I can just mention EasyShop license. So now anyone can easily understand, okay, this link will take me to a licensing information. The same applicable for terms of service, support details. So that's why please be very careful whenever you're choosing the names for your license and contact objects. So after license, we can mention the version. Version we already mentioned in the minimal document itself, and version is a mandatory. And you might have a doubt here, like, does this order matters? Like, do I need to follow this order? So the answer is the order doesn't matter. Like you can move this entire contact object after the license object if needed. Like if that helps you, you can do that. Even you can do the same for the inner fields as well. Like under contact, I can mention the name as a last field. So it's up to us, but please make sure you are following the case sensitivity. And at the same time, you can also visualize how this is going to look like inside the Swagger UI tool or an web page that your consumers is going to use to understand your APIs. So let me revert all the changes that I have done. Like let me put in the previous order itself. Like I'll have contact above the license. Like it's up to you, like what order you want to follow, but I feel like always contact should be above license because that's a more important information to me, but it's up to you. So I hope this is all clear to you. Like now our OpenAPI specification document has full info details along with the contact and licensing details. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. Now in this lecture, let's try to talk about another root element supported by the OpenAPI specification, and this root element is servers. Like in the scenarios whenever someone wants to consume our APIs, the question that they might have is, what are the endpoint URLs that I can use to consume the APIs? So those kind of URL details and server details we can define using the servers object, and this is the root element, and this is not an mandatory element. The reason why it is not mandatory is few organizations, they are not comfortable sharing their hostname details, server details inside the OpenAPI specification due to security reasons. And at the same time, there might be some scenario where your server details are keep changing day-to-day basis. So that's why the servers object is not a mandatory, it's an optional. So whenever you are into a scenario where you can provide your server details inside the OpenAPI specification, you can use this server root element, and using this server object, you can mention the list of server details. Like you may have development server, QA server, staging server, production server. So all those kind of server details you can mention under this servers object. So since we are using a YAML structure, definitely whenever we want to define a list of objects with the help of YAML, like I said previously, we need to use the hyphen. So hyphen indicates a list of elements inside the YAML structure, and the list of fields that we can mention inside the each array element of the servers is what is the URL, what is the description, and the variables details. So the URL is pretty self-explanatory. It is a mandatory field, and using this you can mention your server URL details like along with the host name, port number. So this is the endpoint URL using which your consumers can invoke your APIs. And using description you can explain about your server details, like whether those belongs to a development environment, UAT environment, or any other environment. And at last we also have variables. The purpose of these variables is, so just like inside any programming language, here also we can define some variables, and against to those variables we can declare some values. So instead of you hard coding those values directly inside your URL, you can use these variables as a placeholder. So don't worry if you're not very clear about the uses of variables here. I'll be showing an example in few minutes, but on a high level I see majority of the people, they always use the URL and description. And you can also see on the left hand side of the slide where I have mentioned the list of servers both with the URL and description details. So now I hope you are clear about this. So let's try to document the server details inside our OpenAPI specification with the help of servers object. So for the same, let me go to the Swagger editor page. So this is the OpenAPI specification version that we have as of now. So here what we can do is just above paths, since the servers is a root element, we just have to make sure we are moving the cursor back to the starting of the line. So here I'm going to give the name as servers, and after the name we can give the colon. And since I want to define the list of server details, definitely we need to press enter here, and we need to start each server details element with the help of hyphen. So like I was telling before, hyphen indicates an array element or list elements inside YAML syntax. So let me mention some list of servers here. So I'm copying paste some content here. I just don't want to type in front of you to save some time of viewers. So here you can see the hyphen is repeated 3 times. That means I'm trying to define 3 server details. And if you want, you can give a tab space, like which will make all these elements under servers. So this is also perfectly fine inside YAML. Even if you ignore the tab space also is perfectly fine, because my YAML knows that the servers is going to hold a list of elements or list of fields. So that's why spacing is not required here, but just for to make it look in terms of indentation, we can give a space here. So like you can see here, I have defined the URL and description, and this is my development server URL, and this is my staging server URL, and this is my production server URL. The same can be seen inside the Swagger UI as a list of servers. Like this gives a clear information to my consumers who is trying to consume my APIs. Like these are the options that they have, and using these URLs they can invoke my APIs. And one more element that is supported under server is variables. So let's try to take an example and understand how variables works under servers. For the same, I'm going to introduce one more server here. Like let me paste some content. So if you can see here, I have mentioned some URL information But URL information has some placeholders, like this is the placeholder with the name username, and the port also is a placeholder. So that's why I have mentioned these placeholders around the curly braces. And very similarly, we also have one more variable placeholder, which is version here. So now my OpenAPI specification will look for these variables to be defined under the URL. So just after URL, I have created a variables field. Under these variables field, we can define any number of variables. So the very first variable that I have created is username, the next one is port, and the last one is version. So please note that the indentation, so after variables, I need to make sure the tab spacing is being maintained, so that this indicates to my YAML all these variables like username, port, and version are present under this variables field. And for each variable, I can give what is the default value that it has to consider. Like for username, the default value that I want to consider is demo. And similarly for port number, the default value that I want to consider is 8443. And for version also, the default value that I want to consider is V1. And after default values, we can also provide the description for each variable like username, port, and version. But here you can see we just have a description for username. And we can also see one more flavor of variables under port. Like under port, we can also define the list of valid values. Like using enum inside OpenAPI specification, we can mention the list of valid values. So here under enum, I have mentioned the two elements. One is 8443 and the second one is 443. And since this is an array of elements, I have to make sure I'm using this hyphen. So if I try to use any other port outside these enum values, my OpenAPI specification will not accept, it will throw an error. And since here I have multiple values, the default value makes perfect sense here. By default, I want to show this 8443 as an value. And for version also, we have default as V1. So this is how we can define the variables, and we can define the same variables as a placeholder inside the URL. So now if I go and observe the drop down of the servers, you can see it is still showing the placeholder server details. But if I click on that option, you will have an computed URL in the down saying that this is my username, which is demo, and this is the default port, which is 8443, and this is the version, which is V1, which I have mentioned inside my version variable. And if you can scroll down here, you can see you have the username, port, and version. If needed, you can change this to some easy, and accordingly your computed URL also will change. But for port, I don't have any other option, because since I have defined the enum values, it will force me to select one of these two values. But for other variables, since it is a text box, by default it will populate only the default values. But if needed, I can change that, and accordingly my computed URL will show here. So now if I try to change to the other server's URL where I don't have any variables, you can see all those fields which were showing earlier in the down are disappeared. So I hope you are seeing the power of OpenAPI specification, how flexible it is, how mature it is. So this way, using server's root object, we can define any number of server details. And I hope you are clear about this. So what I will do is I will take this as a second milestone of our OpenAPI specification document. I will check in this OpenAPI specification document inside our GitHub repository. So feel free to refer to the same for any issues that you have. So try to compare and see where you have done a mistake, so that you can easily correct your OpenAPI specification, and you can also have those files as a reference for your future work. So with this, we have successfully discussed about servers. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. As of now, this is how our OpenAPI specification document looks like. So if you see here, there are no operations defined because our paths object is empty. As of now, we have only defined the metadata about our APIs, like what are the terms of service, what is the description, what are the contact details, license details, servers details. So these are all the metadata which applicable for all our APIs inside our organization. So you can have 100 APIs or 1000 APIs, but regardless of that, all this metadata is going to be common for all your APIs. So as a next step, what we can do is we can start implementing or defining some API paths inside our OpenAPI specification, and in the same process we can also learn how to define our APIs or how to describe our APIs with the help of OpenAPI specification. But before we try to understand the paths object, let me do some cleaning here. So as of now, you can see this document is looking super lengthy and complex. We can remove some details, like under servers, I'll just keep only one server details so that we can get some space here. And at the same time, what we can also do is we can click on this downwards arrow that you can see on the left hand side. So this will close that element. The same I will do for contact and license. And in fact, if you want, you can close entire info as well. So this way now my OpenAPI specification document looks very simple because I have hidden most of the information, but whenever I want to check or change the information, I can easily click on these arrow icons and accordingly I can play with the document. So now coming to the paths object, like you can expect, under paths we can define any number of API paths. So that's why for a minimal API specification document, we kept this paths as an empty. So that indicates to my Swagger UI tool that there are no operations or API paths defined using this OpenAPI specification. So now let me take you to the slide where we can talk about paths. Like you can see here, there is a screenshot which defines the paths hierarchy. So this is the screenshot which I have taken from the official documentation. So if you read the OpenAPI official documents, you can find very similar screenshot. So this screenshot is self-explanatory. If you try to understand, the very first object that we have is an OpenAPI object. Under that, we can define root elements like OpenAPI object, info object, servers object, and paths object. So servers, they have not mentioned in the screenshot because it's not a mandatory object. Now coming to the paths object, under paths, we can define any number of paths or operations or APIs, like each path can start with slash, what is your endpoint? So your endpoints can be like slash endpoint 1 slash endpoint 2. So this way we can give any number of endpoints under paths. So each endpoint is going to act as an path item object, which describes your HTTP operations that can be performed on a specific path. And under each path, which is under each path item object, you can define details like what is the HTTP method that your path supports. Like, is it a get or put or post or delete? So that's the information that you need to provide below your endpoint paths. Like if a same path is going to support multiple HTTP methods, you can also repeat those details, like for get, these are the details, for put, these are the details, for post, these are the details. And once you define your HTTP method details, you have to explain your operation object. So don't worry if this is all looking super complex to you. Like since you are looking at this very first time, it might be heavy for you to absorb all this information. But like when we are discussing the examples, this is all going to make sense. But for now, I just wanted to give an overall picture how the paths object is going to look like. So under operation object, we need to provide details like what is the summary of your operation, what is the description of your operation, so what exactly your operation is going to do, what my consumer is going to get whenever he consumes that particular operation. So those details we need to define under summary and description. And the next data that we can provide under operation is what is the request body. Definitely every API will accept some request. So you need to provide those details inside the request body. And after the request, definitely we should also describe our API's response, how they are going to look like. Under responses, there can be multiple scenarios. Like you may get 200 response, which indicates your operation is successful. You may get HTTP error code 500, which indicates there is some exception happen at the backend. You may get 401, which is authentication failed. So there are various HTTP response codes. So based upon that, your response may change from response code to code. So that's why under responses, we can define multiple response object against each of the HTTP code. Like for 200 response code, this is how my response is going to look like. For 401, this is how it is going to look like. For 500, this is how it is going to look like. So that's why you can see under responses, you can define multiple response object. And what exactly we can define inside our response object means definitely there will be a description field, and after that you will have a content field. So under content field, you have to give the schema structure of your response, like how your response is going to look like. So this is the whole hierarchy of our paths object inside OpenAPI specification. So let me try to revise one more time quickly. So there will be a paths, which is a root element. Under paths, we can define any number of paths with the help of / followed by what is your path name. Under each path item object, we can define what are the HTTP method that your API is going to support. Under HTTP method details, we need to provide the operation object, which will have summary, description, request body, response, and operation ID. So operation ID is something which you can provide a name to your operation. So we are going to discuss the same in the coming lectures. And inside the operation object, we have responses where you can mention multiple response objects. The reason is you may get a success response, failure response. So for all these kind of scenarios, we should be able to provide multiple responses with the help of response object. And a response object, again, we have to define the fields like description and content. So I hope you are clear like how to represent paths, and I'm sure you might have some questions and confusions here, but please don't worry. This is just a summary that I want to provide you, and we are going to spend enough time understanding all these paths, operations, responses, requests, everything we are going to discuss in detail. So with this, let's start our journey of paths inside the OpenAPI specification. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye. Now in this lecture, let's try to describe our first API path inside our OpenAPI specifications. For the same, first I need to remove these empty curly braces. So as soon as I remove those curly braces, you'll see I'm getting an error saying that there is a structural error inside my OpenAPI specification, because under paths, it should be either empty or I should be defining some API paths. So let's try to define some paths here. So I'm pressing enter here. Post that, I had to give a tab space. Now here I need to give what is my API path value. The API path has to start with / and what is your API path value. And this has to be a relative path because you already define an server endpoint URL under servers that you can imagine like as a base URL. To the same base URL, whatever endpoint path that you are going to mention under paths will be clubbed together to invoke this API path that you are going to define. So here the name that I want to give is categories. So this is my path value. Like we are discussing in the starting of the course, the use case or the application that we are going to work inside this course is Easy Shop. So Easy Shop is an e-commerce web application. So this is a fictionary application where it exposes certain amount of APIs to the outside public consumers. So any website or any consumer using these APIs, they can list down the products that are available with Easy Shop in their websites, and they can encourage their end users or customers to buy these products. And whenever a customer buy a product in the consumer websites, they can place an order to the Easy Shop along with the address details. So what this Easy Shop will do is it will take all those order details through an API, and it will process the order by sending the product to the given address by the consumer. So in the process, it's a kind of win-win situation for both Easy Shop and the consumers. So Easy Shop will get more number of customers, more number of end users, and more number of orders through various consumers, which means they can do more business. And at the same time, the consumers who are helped Easy Shop by consuming their APIs and selling their products, so they will get a commission bonus or affiliate bonus based upon the selling that they are doing. So this is the whole story behind the Easy Shop. And for the same, since the producer who is the Easy Shop and the consumers, they have to communicate with each other, we are going to need a list of APIs. So those APIs, we are going to explain them using this OpenAPI specification standards. So that's a very, very long story of Easy Shop. I hope you got the scenario. Now, the very first part that we want to define here is /categories. So the purpose of this categories API path is whenever some consumer invokes this categories API path, my Easy Shop is going to send them what are the list of categories supported by my Easy Shop. So in other sense, you can say like list of departments, like under products, I can sell laptop, mobiles, televisions, headphones. So these are all the categories. So inside categories, we'll have multiple products. But for now, this slash categories endpoint, it is going to provide what are the list of categories that are supported by Easy Shop. So once we provided this endpoint path, we need to provide the colon. So this is the correct way of defining your paths. So very similarly, you can define any number of paths like 1, 2, 3, any number of API paths we can define here. Under each path, we can define again more details about the operation, about the request and response, which we are going to discuss in few minutes. But like you can see here, we are not following the hyphen which we need to follow inside YAML whenever we are mentioning multiple array elements or list elements under an object. The reason could be both hyphen and forward slash, both are special characters. Maybe due to that reason, OpenAPI specification authors, they might have thought, let's not follow that YAML style of defining the multiple elements. So instead, the OpenAPI specification will only expect you to provide the forward slash and followed by what is your relative path name. So this is how we can define multiple paths. But for now, inside this lecture, we are going to create the very first path by providing complete details. So let me remove the duplicate paths here. So once I have defined the path name, I just have to give tab space here. So here I have to define what is the HTTP method that is supported by my path. So in this scenario, since it is going to return the list of categories, so it's a get operation. So we have to give the value as get followed by colon. And again, we need to press the enter and followed by space. So this is the hierarchy that we need to follow. Like under paths, we need to have path name. Under path name, we need to mention what is the HTTP method. So whenever you're following this hierarchy, we just have to make sure that tab spacing or indentation we are following. Otherwise, the OpenAPI specification compilation will fail. Now under the HTTP method, which is get, we need to mention the summary, description, how your request is going to look like, how my response is going to look like. So all those details we need to mention here. So first, let me mention the summary and description here. So like you can see here, I have pasted the summary and description of this path, which is categories. So please note that this tab space I have given. That means under this get, I have these elements like summary and description. So the summary says it will list all the categories, whereas the description says returns the list of categories supported by Easy Shop. After this summary and description, we can provide the request body, but in this scenario, there won't be any request body or request sending because this is just a simple get operation which does not require any request inside our HTTP body. So that's why we can simply ignore the request body for now for this API path. And of course, we'll be implementing many post API paths, and during those discussions, I'll be explaining you how to define the request body. But for now, we can simply ignore the request body information. We can straight away jump into the responses. So whenever you want to explain the responses inside your OpenAPI specification, we need to mention the responses as a field name, after that colon, and press enter. Now under my responses, I can define multiple response like for success, for failure. So that's why we need to give a tab space here and mention what is the HTTP code that you want to mention in order to explain your response structure. So here I want to explain for the success scenario. That's why I'm giving the 200 as the response code, and I'll give a colon and I'll press enter. Then we need to provide tab space again, and inside this we need to explain our response structure. So this way we can define any number of response codes and we can define response structure for all of them. But for now, inside this lecture, let's focus only for the success scenario. So now under 200 response code, I just have to give tab space, and after that I can mention description. So this is the description of my response code, which is 200. So whenever we get a 200 response code, inside the response we are going to have a list of categories. After the description, we need to mention the content. So content is the element which will explain or which will describe our response structure. So now I have provided the content colon. Next we need to press enter and provide a tab space here. So under content, we need to define what is the content type, like whether we are returning a JSON content or XML content. That's why I need to mention here application/JSON colon. So if you have something like XML or binary format or any other content structure, we need to mention the same. So once we define the content structure like application/JSON, we need to press enter and give the tab space and provide the schema here. So the purpose of the schema here is I'm going to explain my response structure, how it is going to look like with the help of this schema field. So I hope you're following the structure. So it is very easy to understand if you practice multiple times, and that's what we are going to achieve throughout this course, because we're going to implement multiple APIs, and during this journey, I'll make you as a master as well. So here, once we have defined the schema, we need to explain how our schema is going to look like for the 200 response. So I just need to press enter here. After that, we need to give tab space as usual. And here I need to mention what is the type of my schema. So the type I want to give here is array. The reason is my response is going to have a list of category details. Like category details will be repeat for all the categories that I have. So that's why I need to give as type array. And whenever we are using array as our type inside our schema, we need to make sure we are mentioning a field called items. This item indicates I'm going to explain the structure of each of the items present inside my array. So under array, again, I have to mention what is the type of my each of the item. Like I said, I'm going to send the list of objects, and these objects explain the category details. So that's why I need to give a space here, and I need to mention type as object, because I'm going to return a list of objects. So due to that reason, we need to mention this type as object. Now I have given simply the type as object, but I need to explain what are the field names or what are the properties that this object is going to return. For the same, what we have to do is we have to give a field name called properties, because I'm going to explain the properties of my object. After that, I just need to enter and give a tab space, because under this properties, I'm going to explain multiple property values. So that's why I need to make sure that tab spacing I am giving under properties. So the very first property that I'm going to return inside my object is category ID. So category ID is an integer or is a number which represents the ID value of that particular category. Like each category or each department will have an ID representation. So that value I'm going to return inside this category ID. So once I have defined my property name, which is category ID, I have given colon and I have to press enter and I have to give a tab space. So here I need to mention what is the type of my category ID property. So the category ID type is integer. So that's what I'm trying to communicate here. And after this, I want to mention one more property. So that's why I need to make sure I'm in the same line where my category ID is present. So here, the next property that I want to mention is name. So name is the next property. And here also, I need to mention the type of this name property. So obviously it will be string here. So that's why I have mentioned the type as string. So this way I have explained how my array items is going to look like. So let's try to quickly review here. So first we have started with the API path name, which is /categories, and what is the HTTP method. And post that under this get HTTP method, we need to mention what is the summary, what is the description. And since we don't have any request body requirement, that's an optional, we have not mentioned the same. Whereas since responses is a mandatory, we need to mention responses colon, and after that we can mention multiple responses based upon your response code. So as of now, we have mentioned the response for the successful response, which is 200. So that's why I have mentioned this response code. Under this response code, I'm trying to explain my response structure. So first I need to describe my response using the description. After that, I need to mention the content type of my response. So that's why I need to use this content. And after that, I need to mention what is the content type, which is application/JSON. Under application/JSON, we need to explain our schema structure, how our response JSON schema is going to look like. So that's why I need to give this schema. Under schema, I need to mention what is the type of my schema. Am I going to simply return a string or an object or an array? I need to provide those details. So that's why using type, I mentioned the array. And since I mentioned my schema type is array, it's my responsibility again to explain what is the type of each item inside my array. So that's why this items is mandatory whenever you are mentioning type as array. I hope it is making sense to you why we have not provided a space after items. The reason is this items belongs to this type array only. That's why we don't have to send these items inside array. We can keep it in the same structured line where the type array is being maintained. So we just have to follow the same guidelines whenever we are preparing specifications for any elements. So we are going to practice this multiple times, then you'll get a clear picture. So now you can see under items, I need to mention again what is the type of each item. So the type of each item is object, I said. If I said only string, then the story might have finished there itself. But since I said type of each item is object, again, it's my responsibility to provide what are the properties, what are the variables inside your object. So that's why we need to mention the properties inside the same position of type object. Now under properties, we have to mention what are the properties that your object is going to hold. So that's why I have mentioned the multiple properties like category, ID, and the name. And of course, each property we have to explain again what is the type of your property. Is category ID is an integer, float, or strings. So those kind of details we have to provide. So I hope you are very clear with what we have done under paths. In the next lecture, let's try to explore how our Swagger UI is going to display this information. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.